All right, today we're going to dive into a really fascinating modern interpretation of Islamic thought called BioIslam. Now, this isn't just some fringe idea. It's a framework that's grounded in some pretty extensive, heavily footnoted research. And believe me, it challenges some of our most basic ideas about what faith and knowledge even are. So let's just start with this central question, right? It's almost a paradox, and it sits right at the heart of this whole thing. What if the greatest strength of a belief system wasn't about having all the answers, but was actually found in its uncertainty? It's a really challenging thought, and it's exactly the intellectual territory we're going to explore together. But, before we can really unpack that big idea, we kind of have to understand the why behind it. Why does a framework like BioIslam even need to exist? Well, the source material argues that it's a direct response to some of the most pressing, most urgent problems that our world is facing right now. And the framework actually gives these challenges a name: the Big Five Problems. And we're not talking about abstract concepts here. We're talking about real-world issues: deep-seated poverty, the constant loss of our best and brightest through brain drain, the creep of authoritarianism, the systemic barriers created by patriarchy, and of course, the incredible division caused by politicization. The argument is that each one of these is a major roadblock to human progress, and they're often fueled by rigid, unquestioned ways of thinking. Okay, so with those five major problems set up as the target, now we can properly introduce the proposed solution. And that solution is BioIslam, a modern framework that uses a scientific lens, and it's specifically designed to tackle these complex 21st century issues head on. So what is BioIslam, really? Well, at its core, you can think of it as a scientific interpretation of Islam. Its followers, they're called bio-Muslims. And the absolute key, is its methodology. It approaches faith not with a demand for unshakable dogma, but with a scientific, and this word is crucial, a fallibilistic lens. Now, fallibilism, it's just the idea that any of our beliefs could be wrong. So instead of looking for strict, literal rules, this approach tries to find the broad underlying principles in Scripture. And to really get what BioIslam is, it helps to know what it's not. It sets itself up in direct opposition to this concept of taqlid. Taqlid basically means blind faith, or just uncritically accepting dogma without question. And you can see how this ties right back to those big five problems like authoritarianism, which, as the author points out, often lean really heavily on this kind of unquestioning acceptance. So this brings us to the mission, the whole point of it all, or in Arabic, the niyyah. And this is really important. It's not just some abstract philosophical game. The stated intention of BioIslam is incredibly practical. It has a crystal clear goal: to actively work to fix those five major global problems, and by doing that, to help create a world with more piety, more peace, and more prosperity for everyone. But here's the thing. No framework is perfect, right? And what's really interesting is how self-critical the source material is. This brings us to a huge turning point in the discussion. We've heard the promises, we've heard the goals. Now let's look at what the source itself calls the downside, a challenge that's born directly from its commitment to being intellectually honest. And this quote just sets the stage perfectly. There is a downside to every interpretation of every religion if we are to be intellectually honest. That's a powerful statement. It's basically saying that any approach to faith that's truly honest with itself has to admit its own blind spots and limitations. So what is this big challenge? What's the downside? It's the foundational, unapologetic embrace of ambiguity. The source is very direct about this. Outside of a few core rituals, we just can't be absolutely certain how Islam was practiced in its first 100 years. And what looks like a weakness is actually reframed here as a central, necessary feature. It's a strength that comes from honestly facing historical reality. Now, this embrace of ambiguity isn't just a random choice. It's not a cop-out. In fact, the source material, and it cites a ton of scholarly research to back this up, argues that this is the only intellectually sound position you can take. It's a direct result of these massive historical hurdles that make it impossible for us to ever know the full picture with perfect clarity. The research points to two major roadblocks to being historically certain. First up is the chronology hurdle. I mean, get this. Scholars can't even agree on which verse of the Quran was the last one to be revealed. That alone tells you how much historical context has just been lost to time. And second, there's the dictionary grammar problem. Think about it. Any translation is an interpretation. Mainstream English translations are good, but they're not perfect, and they might not capture the full original meaning. And that, by definition, limits how certain we can be. Okay, so if absolute certainty is off the table, how do you find any guidance? Well, this is where the idea of latent principles comes into play. It's the practical tool that BioIslam offers. So instead of trying to piece together exact, literal rules from a patchy historical record, the goal is to pull out the broad, underlying moral and ethical themes from Scripture, the big ideas that are timeless and not tied to one specific moment in history. So what this all does is it carves out a very deliberate middle path. It's presented as a really tough journey, for sure, but a necessary one, right between two opposing and, frankly, equally tricky forms of certainty. And wow, this slide just lays out that contrast so perfectly. On one side, you've got traditionalism, which the framework argues is all about seeking unquestionable answers. It offers that comfort, that warm bath of faux certainty. But then you look at BioIslam. It accepts that some questions might just be unanswerable. It asks you to navigate the cold climbs of uncertainty. And it demands that you have a capacity for fallibilism, that ability to say, you know what, I might be wrong. And this right here is a crucial point. This struggle isn't seen as a weakness of faith. It's actually framed as its highest expression. This internal, intellectual wrestling match, trying to find your way between old dogmas and new pseudo-certainties, is described as the highest form of jihad. And in this context, jihad means that greater internal struggle against our own desire for easy, comfortable answers. And to really drive this point home, the framework makes this incredible parallel to science. This whole idea of analytic ambiguity where uncertainty is just a core part of the subject, that's not some weird theological thing. It's a fundamental part of our most advanced sciences. I mean, think about quantum physics, where particles literally exist in states of probability, or evolutionary biology with its immense complexity. In those fields, uncertainty isn't seen as a failure. It's just an honest feature of reality. And all of this brings us right to the philosophical heart of BioIslam. It argues that true piety isn't about claiming you have all the answers. Not at all. It's found in the sincere, the humble, the lifelong effort to understand, while at the same time acknowledging the huge, vast ocean of what we just don't know and might never know. So we'll end on this final, really provocative thought from the source material. It just sums the whole thing up so well. Unanswerable questions are better than unquestionable answers. And it leaves us with a profound choice to think about, doesn't it? Do we want the comfort of a certainty that might be built on shaky ground? Or do we want the challenging but intellectually honest freedom of sincere questioning? A question that really is at the very core of knowledge, faith, and progress itself.